Alright, we're going to talk about why sexual reproduction, which is an odd question, but it's an important question. But before we do that, I'm going to talk about asexual reproduction, which is basically when something makes an exact copy of itself. So here's mitosis. And in mitosis, you start with a cell. And what happens is the cell, during a process called interphase, makes a copy of its DNA and does other things, but we're going to just focus on that. So here we see two chromosomes, a red and blue one, and it makes a copy of those chromosomes. Now we have two of each, so now we have 4. And then what happens is the cell will organize these, and this is prophase. Here we have metaphase, they line up, and then anaphase, they split. And then you could see here we have telophase and cytokinesis. And now we have two cells that are exactly the same as the original. So you can see that here. You have prophase, and then you have sorry, that was interphase. You have prophase. You have metaphase. You have anaphase, and then you have telophase. And then basically you have two U cells. And again, these two cells are exactly the same as the original cell that underwent mitosis. Now, we use mitosis to grow and to fix things in our body for repair. A lot of organisms use it for reproduction. So if you see here in this picture, you have a hydra with 2 little babies growing out of it. So you can see, this is, by the way, this is a process called budding. And you can see here's a little baby growing out, and here's another one on the other side. And again, so this process gives you two, in this case, 2 exact clones of the original. So what about meiosis then? Because meiosis doesn't give you identical copies. It gives you something different. The purpose of meiosis is to basically give you sex cells, which is going to be half the number of chromosomes, and you'll see that in a second. Okay, so here's an image of a cell. This cell has already copied its chromosomes, so it would have started off with actually 2 chromosomes, as you can see right over here. This cell would have had 2 chromosomes, but it's actually made a copy, so we see 4. These are sisters, okay? They're identical. These are sisters. These are homologous. Now, the term homologous means that they have the same types of genes. So they have, say, like genes for eye color or hair color or how tall you're going to grow. So the red chromosomes and the blue ones have the exact same types of genes, but the 2 red ones not only have the same genes, but they actually have the same version of genes. So they're exact copies of each other. Now, if you look in meiosis, what happens is you have 1 cell becomes 2. You can see that here. You have 1 cell becoming 2, and then each of those cells becomes another cell. So we end up with 4 cells that have half the number of chromosomes. So here we see 1 chromosome, which is half of the original, which was 2. So one purpose of meiosis is, we could see, it's to cut the number of chromosomes in half. So that's a very important purpose, cut the number of chromosomes in half. Now, the reason why that's important is because if you have, for instance, we take us, we have 46 chromosomes. So if we have 23 in our sex cells, so 23 chromosomes in a sperm cell and 23 chromosomes in an egg cell would restore the total number of chromosomes in a human. And if we didn't cut the number of chromosomes in half, then you would not get that number back. So, for example, if a sex cell had 46 chromosomes in it, then you would have a child that would have more than 46 chromosomes, would most likely be lethal. Now, that's one thing. The other thing that happens in meiosis, which is really quite interesting, is crossing over. And here's an interesting picture of crossing over. And you can see in this picture that crossing over actually gives you new combinations. So, for instance, if you look over here, we can actually see this blue chromosome over here actually has a little bit of red in it. So what's happened is that the red chromosome and the blue, which are homologous, remember the term homologous means that they share the same types of genes, have actually swapped. They've actually swapped sections of DNA. And what that does is it gives you new combinations of chromosomes. So these chromosomes that are newly combined are called recombinant chromosomes. We can say recombinant DNA. Now, the purpose of that is to give you new combinations. So we can see here in this picture how crossing over has given us a new combination. So before crossing over, the only possible scenario here would have been big V. So if we see over here, a big V with a big B. Now, what do these stand for? The V and B stand for a particular gene. Now, in this case, I referred to the V as... Okay, sorry for that. We're having a little bit of audio difficulty. Okay, so as I was saying, what you're seeing here are the genes on the chromosomes where the B and the V stand for particular genes. The B standing for hairstyle, the V standing for eye color. And as you can see in the drawing here, the only combinations you can get right now would be brown eyes with curly hair and blue eyes with straight hair. And that is prior to something called crossing over. So what crossing over does give you is it gives you an exchange of DNA between homologous chromosomes which have the same types of genes. And you can see in this drawing here that we can exchange actually letters, so you get recombinance. And you can get a little v with a big B and a big B with a little v. And in that case, you can get brown eyes with straight hair or blue eyes with curly hair. And hence, without crossing over, this would not be possible. And therefore, you would have less variety. Just to recap, the point of meiosis here is to cut the number of chromosomes in half. That way, when you have fertilization, the full number is restored. And the other thing is the crossing over, generating new combinations of chromosomes. So why do all of this? So here's the thing. Because we're not making exact copies, we're going to generate a tremendous amount of variety in our offspring. If you just do the math, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. And a sex cell is only going to have one of the two pairs. So, for instance, imagine we have two pairs here. We have a pair of A's and a pair of B's. What are the possible combinations? Well, if a sex cell is only going to have one of the two pairs, remember, a sex cell can only have half of the information. That means that sex cell is going to have an A and a B. And what are the odds that it'll have a capital A? Well, if you think about the odds are 1/2 that it'll have a capital A, and the odds are it'll have 1/2 that it'll have a capital B. So the odds of it having a capital B would be 1/4. In fact, if you do the math, it's 1/2 to the power of n representing the number of pairs of chromosomes. So, because we have 23 pairs, that means that when you do 2 to the power of 23, we can generate 8 million possible sex cells. It's a lot. When you combine that with 8 million possible sex cells that they have to combine with, so 8 million possible sperm cells, 8 million possible egg cells, that gives you 64 trillion possible zygotes. That doesn't even include crossing over. Remember, crossing over generates even more variety. The point is, there's a tremendous amount of variety being generated by sexual reproduction. Now, so is that good? I guess it's good, but you got to consider that sexual reproduction comes at a cost. So, one thing is you have to go out and find a mate. Now, for a lot of organisms, that could be quite dangerous. For example, this little male spider on the right is going to try to mate with this female spider. Now, this is a very dangerous venture. In this case, the female spider ends up eating the male spider. But if the male spider didn't do that, if he didn't approach the female, there's no way he would be able to pass on his genes. So there is a significant cost to sexual reproduction. Here's just an example of that. So basically, in asexual reproduction, you form an exact copy. Now, I put a little star there because I want to remind you that all organisms are prone to mutations. So even asexually reproducing organisms don't really produce exact copies because mutations do creep in there and change things around. Bacteria, for example, we know they can develop resistance to antibiotics. But in sexual reproduction, we have way more variety. But in asexual, it's low cost. It doesn't cost as much to reproduce, whereas in sexual reproduction, it's a significant cost. And just to illustrate that even more so, even if your life is not in danger in terms of going out and reproducing, imagine that this is an individual, blue, and this is another individual, red. I mean, if this individual who's a female over here gets together with this individual, I mean, she can only really technically pass on half of her DNA. So if they produce a child, the child will be, will have half of her DNA in blue and then half of her partner's DNA in red. Now, if you think about that, that's the point of biology, is to pass on your genes. She's only passing on half her genes. So there's a what's called a twofold cost here, because only 50% of her genes are getting into the next generation. That's a significant price to pay. So again, if there's a really high cost for sexual reproduction, that can only mean one thing, that if so many organisms reproduce sexually and there's such a high cost, there must be a significant benefit to it. So what would that significant benefit be? So what is the advantage of having such high variety? Because obviously its cost is quite high. Well, one line of thinking is that because we are constantly being attacked by things like viruses and other disease-causing organisms, having such high variety gives us more flexibility in dealing with things such as pathogens, and also dealing with environmental fluctuations. Because if you're not as variable, you could be more prone to disease or some environmental catastrophe. And this is why a biologist is so concerned with monocultures, where things like, they have certain agriculture, but genetically they're so similar that if they're prone to some sort of a parasite, then all the individuals, because they're genetically identical to each other, would also be prone to this parasite. Okay, so here's an article from Wikipedia on monoculture, and one of the things it mentions right off the bat is, if you look, monocultures are used in agriculture. Okay, that's good. But since all plants are in monoculture are genetically similar, the disease strikes to which they have no resistance, it could destroy, you can see right here, entire populations of the crops. So obviously having variety is important. Now, does anyone really know why sexual reproduction evolved? It does seem to have benefits in terms of generating variety and protecting us. But at the same time, it's expensive. And the idea that crossing over generates new combinations, which could be good in fighting disease, could also break up really good combinations. So if you have a good combination of genes, meiosis and crossing over will actually tear that apart. So what really is the advantage? I don't know if anyone really truly knows what the advantage is or why sexual reproduction evolved. It is still a bit of a mystery. A lot of good ideas out there. But the fact is that because it is so expensive, there must be tremendous benefit to sexual reproduction. Otherwise, so many organisms wouldn't be reproducing in this mode.